weakening the whole response. So
this meeting is being recorded.
So why did I use the term ecology at the very beginning? In the revised English early years foundation stage, in the specific area understanding the world, I looked to see if sustainability was in the EYFS. And I noticed that ecology was a new word that had been added to the revised edition. But it was added by saying that in addition, listening to a broad selection of stories, non-fiction, rhymes and poems will foster their understanding of our culturally, socially, technologically and ecologically diverse world. And I would actually beg to differ and say, can ecology be learned and experienced through listening? We have to remember that early years encompasses health, care and education. The early years foundation stage sets the standards that all early years providers must meet to ensure that children learn and develop well and are kept healthy and safe. The safeguarding and welfare requirements cover the steps that providers must take to keep children safe and promote their welfare. Through adult modelling and guidance, they will learn how to look after their bodies, including healthy eating, and manage personal needs independently. That is demonstrating that there are aspects of the early years foundation stage that are interconnected. You cannot think that you are educating children without remembering that you are also ensuring their care and ensuring their health. And that is part of the Sustainable Development Goals in recognising that interconnection. And Millie will talk later about healthy eating. Gross and fine motor experiences develop incrementally throughout early childhood, starting with sensory explorations and the development of child strength, coordination and positional awareness through tummy time, crawling and play and movement with objects and adults. And therefore the emphasis is on a quality learning experience for children. We need a quality workforce. And unfortunately, sustainable development isn't really part of higher education, ITE, or within many of the qualifications at the moment. And that is why your responsibility by attending to this today is giving you the opportunity to understand sustainability and be the well-qualified skilled staff that strongly increases the potential of any individual setting to deliver the best possible outcomes for children. So what are the Sustainable Development Goals? There are 17 goals, and they are recognised as part of the UNESCO Agenda 2030. In 2015, 193 countries signed at the COP21 the agreement to say that they were going to try and eradicate such issues such as poverty, inequity, and ensure that all girls and children had opportunities for education, to ensure we kept our oceans clear and our land from being deforestation. But again, those are all interconnected. You can't say, oh, I think today I'm going to look at just one without recognizing that there is an impact on all of them. They are all interconnected and they must not be viewed in isolation. So linking the Sustainable Development Goals to practice, you ask the question, are they visible? Do practitioners know what they are, and can they be used in early years? Well, when I asked that question, there was a mixed reaction about what they are and if they should be in early childhood. Majority of opinions were, no idea, what are they? I've no idea. No understanding, but yes, after I talked to them, they should be included in early childhood. So there is an understanding that early childhood practitioners are willing and are able, with the foundations of early childhood very, very deeply based around sustainable development, that you have an opportunity to be able to embed them. There were some people who said that, they touch on British fundamental values and personal, social, emotional. That is good, but it's developing it and widening it out. I have never seen them visible anywhere, but last week I went to Wales, and the first school I have ever seen with the Sustainable Development Goals evident, and that was in Sansoir in Llandudno, Wales. And as you can see in the middle picture, they have got the Sustainable Development Goals outside on the railings and inside around the top of the inside classrooms. And the image on the right is of some of the older children trying to interpret what the Sustainable Development Goals are. So that was why I included this, because it is to show that you can have these displayed. They can be displayed so that children start to say, what are they? I've developed a new online free Sustainable Development Goal resource, and the link is in these slides, and it is available, and it goes through all of the Sustainable Development Goals. It gives you opportunities for lots of multiple provocations, and the importance about the resource is that the provocation must start from the child, and it must be led by the child. So you don't actually know where you're going to end up going. So it's very much residing with the idea of Reggio Emilia, where it's a co-researching with the child and the adult and their peers, working together to solve a problem or to find a solution. So a question that is asked lots of times: are our children capable of discussing societally sensitive issues? The majority of the time, adults go, no, the children should not be talking about things like that. They have got to have their childhood. But if you remember the quote at the very beginning, where we have got to ensure that these children who are in our care, in 20 years' time, will have a planet for them to live on, we have got to encourage them, and we've got to engage with them in sustainable development. So this is an example from Millie's garden, who you'll meet again later, Millie. And this is about Sustainable Development Goal 1. And the provocation in this example was the story was read to the children. And you can see there it's called A No Money Day. The practitioner reads, there is no food in the fridge, even though Mum works really hard. Mum feels ashamed. I wonder what a no money day might be. Has anybody got any ideas? Child 1, you don't have no money. Practitioner, wake up, Mum, I am hungry. There are no words on this page, but what are they doing? Child 2, they are looking. Practitioner, what are they looking for? Child 3, food. Practitioner, but what have they got? Non-food. As a result of the provocation of the story, It's a No Money Day, Millie and her children went on an adventure. And the extension ideas, and this was that resulted as a result of the provocation, not because Millie planned it, was the children wanted to visit a local supermarket and ask if they could donate to a food bank. They explored the idea of food heroes rather than traditional police. Food heroes in the resource are things like Marcus Rashford, who championed food during the pandemic and encouraged the government to do a U-turn. Discuss what poverty means. Do you know that to be poor, you have to have £1.70 in your purse for the day? So if you've got £1.71 in your purse, you're not classified as poor. Understand what it means when somebody has an empty lunchbox at dinner time. So Millie had an empty lunchbox, and the children discussed what it must feel like to have no lunch. And as a result, the children felt moved to think about others. And this is the beginning of empathy. So this is authentic personal, social, emotional development. This is authentic British fundamental values. That some children had no food. They went to the food bank and they saw how it was distributed. And a follow-on from this provocation, as it was leading up to Christmas, well, the children were having conversations about Christmas presents, and they wondered about children not having them too. And as a result, they were starting to realise that some children are not as fortunate as them. And they decided to contribute with their parents Christmas presents to local charities. That is the answer to the question, can children be involved in societal issues? Yes, they are. Student perspectives on using SDG resources. This was just a few examples, and I'm only going to read one. Oh, sorry. Student 6 said there was a vegan example. I'm not a vegan, but basically I just like the part about teaching children about plant-based foods and diets, and just the importance of teaching children to help them develop and understand and have an opinion on that. So by introducing children to plant-based foods, you're bringing in sustainable development, and you're helping the planet, because meat and dairy products are what causes a lot of carbon emissions into the atmosphere. So, as the student said, such a topic from a young age, this book will highlight and paint a picture to them of plant-based diets and just how they work really. But let's just have a walk through some of the Sustainable Development Goals. The first one I've started with is quality education, SDG 4. And in it, it states quite categorically that early childhood is in it. It's about a quality experience. It's about immersing children in all of the environments and developing a relationship with all of the inhabitants. So again, it resonates again with Reggio Emilia, with the idea of the environment as a third teacher. But it's important to remember that we are having a relationship. Remember the interconnectedness of the pillars, interconnectedness of the Sustainable Development Goals. We are interconnected to every single thing, that living thing that lives with us. We are not hierarchical. The hierarchy is what has caused the problem, and therefore we've got to encourage children to start to have an empathy with the non-human world too. So it's important we provide the right resources and environments so children can freely explore. It's important that they learn to love their locality. Do they know their locality, or are they just driven in a car to the setting and then they go home again? So learn about the locality, go out with them in the locality in all seasons, and be part of the community, intergenerationally, culturally, whatever the weather and wherever you are. Going down the high street and saying hello to the greengrocer, the butcher, going in with the children to buy the food for snack time using real money. These are the opportunities you can do. Sustainable Development Goal, though, cannot be achieved without SDG 3. Remember that interconnectedness about good health and well-being. So we have to ensure we provide all the physical, emotional, spiritual, cognitive and social support through the quality practice, strong relationships, community belonging and a cultural awareness. And this diagram that I developed here, which is place and self, shows the interconnected web of how a child can never ever really have a strong sense of place within their locality if they're not part of it and know it and have a relationship with it. Then there's SDG6, water. Water is in every early years classroom. But to support children to understand about water conservation, use the language water conservation. Have a water butt and use this in both watering the plants and in children's play. This example you can see here is a little girl in Brisbane, Australia, where they were having to restrict the amount of water that they could use by using a ladle. Do that here. It doesn't matter whether we don't have the same drought situation as in Brisbane, but limit what water they can use and talk about how important it is to conserve water and how important it is to recognise that not everybody has rain. Learn how important water is to us all, again, both human and non-human, but always follow their thinking. Where do the children take you with these ideas? So there's a question in early childhood that's always bandied about is risky play. Risky play of health and safety and worrying about regulations, or valuable learning skills that are in the Scandinavian social pedagogy. So when outdoors, use real tools like Maria Montessori advocated, so children learn traditional skills and mathematical ideas of weight and balance. Learn the traditional and cultural work skills. So bring in members of the community who would be only too thrilled to come in and work with you on projects, but demonstrating and modeling ways of working using different tools and making those connections with the community intergenerationally. And it's at the same time as learning the terminologies of trade and practice, and that is Sustainable Development Goal 8, decent work and economic growth. Children learn what the word work is and the economy, and learn that they have a part to play in it by having those skills. This was an example of SDG 8, which was decent work and economy, but it also is interconnected to SDG 9, which is about infrastructure. And this was weaving fences, a traditional skill that's being lost. So you can see the very middle picture was a picture I took of in my local woodlands, where the rangers were making fences using the sticks that had been left on the ground. So why don't you make fences in your areas, in your schools? Not only is it good for the children's gross and fine motor skills, but it's also collaborative, it's communicative, and it's cooperative. And it's also about mathematics, and it's about art and design, as the one on the far right shows, is a weaving that they did as a creative opportunity. But design the fence. So plan the materials to be used. So you start to introduce to children that there is a design system when you're planning something. What materials do we use? Where do we need to go to buy them? Do we need to go to the local hardware shop? And do we need to buy materials and tools to develop this fence? But remember, if you are going to be using twigs from the forest, do not damage trees for the activities, use twigs from the forest floor. People say, I haven't got any room in my setting. Limited space is not a reason to not immerse children in ecology. You could make a walled garden with a pallet. The one on the far right shows an old pallet that has been made and you could put in your plants. Recycled plastic bottles in the picture next to it. I'm sorry, I'm in a situation where I'm right next to a grid going up. Recycle plastic bottles or round wooden sieves. Audit the intergenerational support you have within and around your setting. Who can come in and help you build? Who can garden? Involve the children in the design and the making of the walled gardens. And this is the link that I've put in for making a vertical garden from upcycled pallet wood rather than just buying them. So again, building on the idea of designing and making a bug hotel. I've been in lots of settings where there's bug hotels, but are they there for a reason, or is it just basically for saying, look to Ofsted, look what we've got? So go on an insect walk around the outside space to decide where the best place is to put the bug hotel. Research the types of insects found to know what materials they like to sleep or live in. Try out the construction first with blocks or Lego. Use recycled materials and transfer the small-scale plans that you have drawn, as you can see here in the example, to the larger construction. Record the children's visible thinking and evaluate the process so children learn about evaluation, adaptation, and suitability of resources. And this links to your sustainable development cities and communities. Again, linking with recycling, which is SDG 12, and you can see how in SDG 11 and SDG 9, we are using recycling materials. Recycle materials in your garden space. For example, cardboard rolls make fab containers for your seedlings. And this picture here next to the Sustainable Development Goal 12 is a wall that has been made by the children. The children designed and built a wall using large milk containers. They can fill the large milk containers with sand, and then they've supported cement was poured all over them and created a wall for their garden. Remember to compost rather than waste, and I think Millie will talk about that as well. And that links you back to SDG 8 and SDG 9. So SDG 15 is life on land, which tends to resonate the most with early childhood with the environmental pillar. But ensure that children have time to be in the woods. You do not need to plan an activity in the woods. Just let them observe and see the habitats and listen to the sounds of the forest. Let them just lie down on their backs and look up through the trees. And let them just stop and close their eyes and listen to the bird song. Practitioners must help children to love the ecology of their world. And it is through developing a relationship with it that they will want to care for it. But it's not a one-off visit. It can't be, we're just going to visit the woods today. And what's the purpose? It's about regular visits over sessions. It's the same as with a human relationship. You have to see it and be part of it, and it has to be consistent. And that is the same with the woods. How can children understand how things are dying, how things are changing, if they don't ever visit the area, the locality. And it might not be the woods, it might be the river, it might be the local garden, it might be the local high street. It's about knowing what is in your area and being aware of it so you can protect and restore, and the children can be part of this. When you're using, again, SDG 15, Life on Land, one of the things about Maria Montessori was that she asked children needed to be able to discriminate between different shades of green and brown in their environment. Montessori has what is called our shade boards, but you could make one using paint sample cards from B&Q or Homebase. You could make a scavenging board where you put one of the colours. So as you can see in the picture, the colour was put, and then the children were looking for different greens, or it could be you're looking for the same green. So you're using the words same, different, and you are linking to understanding the world because you are actually getting to understand their world, but it's in an authentic way, because you can talk about the dryness of the leaves if they're on the floor. But do not ever encourage the children to pick leaves or flowers off the trees. Only use what is on the ground. They, and so do the practitioners, need to know the names of the trees and the leaves or the seaweed or the birds on the beach. Practitioners must have this knowledge to support children. If they don't have that knowledge, you go back to the idea of Reggio Emilia with the co-researching. So going onto the beach, when I was doing some beach kindy work with a group of children, one little girl, when we were looking and classifying the seaweed on the beach, on the Wirral, she noticed a seaweed and said that she'd seen this on her holiday in Cornwall. And when we researched it, and found that the seaweed that she saw in Cornwall should not be on the sea outside of the Wirral. And therefore, it led us to have a conversation on the fact that the water around the Wirral is warming, because the warmer sea meant that the southern seaweeds were moving up, which demonstrate climate change and the warming of the atmosphere. Support children with mapping skills of their area so they can draw and articulate what they want to say. Help children to understand what plants are needed to help the bees and the planet. Bees are really important, and children love being involved with letting the bees be part of their setting. If you are lucky enough to have an opportunity to let the grass grow longer in one area so it becomes a wildflower garden, then children can have opportunities to observe butterflies, bees, all of the insects which seem to be dying out because we're not providing hedgerows and wildflower the same as it used to be years ago. Ensure that in your setting there are ecological books that must be for all ages. This book is for babies, and therefore we can say that babies can be immersed in this. They can lie outside and look up at the sky. They can be part of feeling and textures. It's not just the 3 to 5s or the 3 to 8s that we're working with. We are working with 0 to 5. And so by immersing them too in stories and in songs and in the environment, then you are supporting them. So let's just remember, we need to immerse children. We need to let them become interconnected with their community and their planet. This diagram shows how the Sustainable Development Goals could be divided around society, economy, climate, water, soil and biodiversity, and individual. But the most important thing is to remember that they are all interconnected. And there's a Chinese proverb that says, tell me and I will forget, show me and I will remember, involve me and I will understand, step back and I will act. And that is what we are trying to do. We are trying to get children to become activists for our planet. And that's your role, to help them through provocations and experiences. This is just a short video clip of an interconnected story. It was the Legacy Cafe in Liverpool, and it was about bringing the intergenerational aspect of sustainability together. The elderly were the wisdom keepers. They had knowledge of skills that were being lost. So think back to SDG 8, SDG 9. they felt that they didn't have any purpose. And so by inviting them in, not just to have children sing at them, the elderly were the ones that were teaching the children and the families how to do these skills that were being lost. And I'm hoping it will start. Sorry, I'm not having much luck in getting this to start. Maybe I can come back to it. Oh, wait a minute. Is that it?
So you've got the elderly, you've got parents, you've got children, you've got 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, and they're mixing together, learning skills that sort of like would have been handed down traditionally in the family. But because those skills are not being handed down in the family now, we're using the family centre as sort of like a concept to say, come here to learn how to sew, come here how to learn to knit, to weave, to mend a bicycle, to learn how to make sustainable dinners rather than buying a takeaway dinner, but also to break down stereotypes. So it's lovely to see a dad learning to knit. There's a nice story of Mary, who's 80. She doesn't have any family locally. When she first arrived, she sort of like had got very little idea of being with young children because she didn't have any. And she came to do the sewing and the knitting, and there was a little boy there, and he would have the same similar type of reluctance to sitting with other people. And at the end of the first session, he was sitting on a knee, and the practitioners were saying that they had never seen him sit for so long and so quietly and so engaged. When everybody is together, it actually sort of like represents what a true society should be like, about a community where you don't actually look for differences, you're looking for things that you've got in common, where people are just sitting there and saying, can you help me, I don't know how to backstitch. Oh my goodness, I've dropped my stitch in knitting. It becomes a natural way of just integrating together, and it's about breaking down loneliness. It's good for the elderly as much as it is good for the early years as well.
And I'm just going to end here with a book that I co-wrote, which was Understanding Sustainability in Early Childhood Education. And it's got case studies and approaches from across the United Kingdom. So it's got England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland with their different approaches. And it's also got links to Montessori and to Steiner practice. Because if you actually understand early childhood and the pioneering giants of early years, Steiner, Froebel, Montessori, they were all advocates for sustainability. If it wasn't using traditional skills and learning with tools, it was social justice, inclusive education, community ethics, and therefore we need to re-engage with our pioneering giants and bring sustainability back into the settings. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Diane. That was really, really interesting. Thank you very, very much indeed. I just wanted to apologise once again for the sound quality. Diane, since in the very, very recent days and weeks, Diane has been invited into London City to have a meeting with some very important people regarding her resource. So hence the fact she is actually in a hotel. So hence the quality. So we do apologise, but Diane, thank you so much. That was really, really interesting. And don't forget this resource will be sent out. So Millie, I wonder if you can continue with the presentation.
I can indeed. Can you see my screen share now? Yes, good. Okay, and can you hear me okay? Yeah.
I hear you perfectly. Thank you, Millie.
Great, that's lovely. I am just conscious of the time. My presentation is coming out as around 20 minutes. Do you think I've got time to do the whole thing, or shall I try and...
No, that's fine. That's fine, Millie.
I know you want to have time for some questions at the end. Okay, I will get started. Thank you so much for having me. Well, I'm just going to move the videos over so I can see my own screen. So I've already been introduced, but I'll just tell you a little bit more about myself. So my name is Millie. I run a childminding setting in Bristol. So as a childminder, that means that my family home where I live with my husband and children is the Ofsted registered early years setting. But it just so happens that in my case, since 2016, I've been operating almost entirely from the garden. And I'm going to show you a little bit more of what that looks like before I talk to you about my work around sustainability. And as Gail said earlier, I also have a wider leadership role in Bristol, so I have the huge privilege of going into settings and supporting them and delivering training and CPD and that kind of thing. Today, I want to really focus on just bringing to life some of the kind of theory and framework that Diane has laid out with all her expertise, and kind of talk to you about what it looks like in practice in my setting. And I've decided that I'm going to focus on Sustainable Development Goal 2, because actually just to talk about all the goals, I'd be talking all morning. So I'm going to focus on one goal, but I'm going to try and show you how it's very much part of that holistic, interconnected model of sustainability. So yeah, I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about that. But I think first, I'm not able to move on. Oh, I am. I just want to tell you a little bit more about my setting and the work that I do, because then you'll have an understanding of the context in which the sustainability work is taking place. So Millie's garden, as I call it, is situated in a residential area in Bristol. So we've got neighbours on either side, and we're close to main routes into the city centre. So it's very much an urban area, but we do back directly onto a nature reserve and a woodland. So we have this green corridor from our garden that runs all the way through the city and out into the countryside, which means we get fantastic wildlife, which is really, really exciting. The garden's 200 foot long and 50 foot wide in places. And we're set up so that we can be outdoors all day. We've got shelter, we've got running water, we've got a kitchen where we can cook and eat with the children, and we've got a compost toilet. So there's no need to go into the house. I always emphasize that we're not a forest school. Sometimes people call us a forest school. And my original training background is as a forest school leader. But over time, it's really developed into a very unique pedagogy. I've been very influenced by my studies and doing a BA, and I'm really inspired by the work that happens in Reggio Emilia. And I think if you visit my setting, that comes through really strongly in the work that we do with the children. And I employ 2 assistant childminders. One of them is a trained Steiner Waldorf kindergarten teacher. So she brings a very strong Steiner kind of vibe into the garden. And the other one is a Danish woman whose her previous experience of working with young children has been in Copenhagen in very outdoorsy nurseries, with that strong emphasis on social development. So a real mix of different perspectives which comes together, and I think that's really cool. I like that. I describe my garden and my setting as a real utopia, and that's not to say that it's perfect, because it really isn't. All of us have things that we need to improve on, and we're all on a journey, and I don't believe there's ever a kind of finished product or end point. But I call it that because I'm always striving towards my setting reflecting a vision of society, how I would like it to be. It's ambitious for social, environmental justice in the broadest sense, real focus on well-being, children as beings in the here and now, as well as people of the future. So I wanted to say about this idea of real utopias that it's always a work in progress, and I'm very much on the journey of sustainability, as all of you will be too, and that this idea of a real utopia, these settings will never look the same. They are responsive to local context. They're responsive to, my own values and the things that I bring to the setting, as well as different cohorts of children I work with. So it's always changing. So your setting and your work will look different, and that's a good thing. That's how it should be. So that's me, and I'll just show you a few photos of the garden. Like I said, it's a wildlife-friendly garden. And to me, what that means is that we live with sensitivity to the natural world. Every decision I make about the design of the space takes into consideration the rights of the children and the staff, but also the rights of the many animals and birds and insects and plants that inhabit the garden, because it's their space too. So that's a really kind of core value in our setting. Just a few photographs to show you. We've got a little cabin, which is basically just a shed, but it's a place where children can hang up their bags and coats, and we keep a small number of resources. And we have this beautiful outdoor kitchen and dining area, which you can see in the photograph on the right, where we cook and eat with the children. We've got a dedicated art studio, which is in a polytunnel. The really, really strong aspect of our provision is creativity and children's multimodality. So this is a very important and central space in our setting. And I just included these photos to show you really that I'm not trying to create a classroom outdoors. So although children can come to me and they can have all the experiences that they might typically have in a nursery setting, like block play, home corner play, dolls, and so on and so on, I'm not trying to create the feel of a classroom outside. We want it to feel like a garden. We want it to feel green. And that's what's special about this space. And I feel like that's very, very, it sort of presents uniquely rich learning opportunities for children. So, as I said, I'm going to focus on Sustainable Development 2, which is zero hunger. And I think I've chosen that one because it's an area of particular strength and interest for me. But we do work on all the Sustainable Development Goals, and I'm going to try and weave them in a little bit as I talk to you about what this goal looks like in my setting. The 4 broad goals are to end hunger, achieve food security, achieve improved nutrition, and promote sustainable agriculture. So it's really huge and broad. And I don't need to tell you, this is a massive global issue around the world. We have significant numbers of people who simply do not have enough food to eat for so many reasons. That's to do with money, it's to do with agriculture, it's to do with climate change. And I think the number is rising. But at the other end of the scale, and very much connected to this Sustainable Development Goal, we also globally have staggering numbers of people who are overweight and obese, and year on year that puts more and more strain on healthcare systems. So it's really, really important on an international level, but also I think on a local level. Here in Bristol, where I am, none of the children that I work with in my tiny little setting of 9 children experience hunger at home. So you might say, well, it's not relevant to them, but actually it is in their community. They do see homelessness. When they leave me and they go to school, they will be in classrooms of children who rely on food banks. So it's very much a local issue. In Bristol, we have quite alarming numbers of children who arrive at school underweight because they don't have enough to eat at home. And we also have increasing numbers of children leaving reception and then further down the line, leaving year 6, overweight or obese. So it's a local issue as well as global. And it's really important, therefore, that I'm addressing it in my work. And what I hope that you'll see is that although sometimes this will involve, big societal kind of tricky discussions with children, like Diane illustrated when she talked about the project that the children and I did around food banks, actually with the younger children that I work with, that might not be the case. That will come up if I think that they have an interest in the need to explore these things. But otherwise, it's about giving them hands-on, real-life, meaningful experiences with this concept of food. So let's delve into it a little bit more. I'm going to talk to you about the seed to plate cycle, which I think is something that most of you will have done with children. I'm sure most of you will have grown food with children before, but I want to talk and think a little bit more about the sustainability of that, and maybe moving beyond the seed to plate process and thinking about renewability and coming full cycle with it. So I want to tell you what that looks like in my setting. So the first step is choosing seeds. And as the adult, I don't decide what we're going to grow in the garden each year. I let the children decide. That's really important that they have a voice in our setting. So they may have very clear ideas and say, we want to grow carrots, we want to grow potatoes. Other times, if they don't, I will take them onto the online seed catalogue and we will browse through together and they can choose what they would like to grow. So you can see the seeds that we buy are from a company called the Real Seed Catalogue, which are heritage heirloom seeds. This has so many learning opportunities. It's personal, social and emotional development because children are expressing their preferences, making decisions and engaging with others through talk. It's literacy as we're reading print in a meaningful context on the online catalogue and on the labels. It's maths because children are working with the adults to plan and look at the growing space that we've got and figure out what we can actually accommodate there, ordering the correct number of seeds, using money in a real context to buy them. And it's technology if we do go on the online catalogue and using a computer in a very purposeful context. And it also links with British values. This is democracy in action because children are making decisions jointly with peers and adults, and they're learning that their view counts in our setting. The children are involved in the whole process, so they plant seeds, they work with the adults. It's a very fiddly task, but children, even my little 18-month-olds, will show tremendous fine motor skills and development when they are entrusted with something that they know is significant and important in their community. That's really important for children, to be trusted and that they see that we value them as competent individuals. Again, it links with so many different learning opportunities, and again with British values and this idea of individual liberty, and trusting in children's competence and helping them to develop the positive sense of self by trusting in them. And then the children are involved in the whole process of growing and caring for plants, all the way through. So they will water, they'll weed, they'll thin out the seedlings. They become very invested in this process, and often in the morning when they come in, the first thing that they want to do is check on how the plants are doing and go through all the kind of care routines that we need to do with our plants. This kind of links with lots of different sustainable development goals, which I'm really interested in. So because we grow without chemicals and organically, and the children become aware of that, we're linking with Sustainable Development Goal 15, which is promoting life on land and healthy habitats. So that's, you know, that idea of living sensitively with the natural environment in our garden. All children are involved in these tasks, and there's an expectation that they're all capable of strength and skill. That's Sustainable Development Goal 5, gender equality, but also inclusion more broadly. As a part of the design and infrastructure in the garden, you can see in the photograph on the left, we collect rainwater. So any buildings and structures in the garden, we have water butts attached to, and they collect rainwater. So children are learning that water is a precious resource, not to be wasted. They use the water around the garden in their watering tasks. And so, yeah, by conserving water, we're teaching about the value of it as a resource, and that's Sustainable Development Goal 6. But it's also Sustainable Development Goal 9, which is how we plan for the sustainable infrastructure of spaces that we create. And I think that's really relevant to early year settings and thinking about the impact that we have environmentally. So I just wanted to share a little bit about that with you. And the most exciting part, most children will agree, is harvesting. There's this lovely time of year in the garden where the trees are heavy with plums, and the strawberries in the strawberry patch, and raspberries and currants. And at snack time, I'll give the children a basket and just say, will you go and collect some snack for us? And they'll go off and bring food back to the kitchen. And it's really magical. But I wanted to emphasize actually that we do harvest food all year. We have autumn crops. We use our polytunnel art studio to grow winter salads and greens so that we're able to harvest through the winter and also in the early springtime. And we also go foraging as well in our local community a lot. So this term coming up, I'm planning to forage nettles to make a nettle soup with the children, and also elderflowers to make elderflower cordial. And we have links to our local community. So we have a neighbour, our next door neighbour has 5 large apple trees, and we go to him during the autumn and collect apples. And there's a community orchard in our local woodland, which we visit regularly with the children. So it's really important that this food growing and foraging doesn't just happen in our garden, it extends beyond the garden and out into the community. And then bringing it to the end of that process is cooking as well as eating. So we do lots of cooking with the children. We cook a meal or a snack from scratch with them at least once a week. Often it's a vegetable soup, and because we do that so routinely, they are able to do it with very minimal support from the adults, you know, peeling and chopping the vegetables and cooking it into a soup. But we also do kind of seasonal treats. You can see in one of the photographs here, we've made a crumble with the plums from our garden and the apples from our neighbour's garden and blackberries that we foraged in our local woods. And in the next photograph, there's a little girl eating an ice lolly, and we've basically just whizzed up lots of currants and strawberries from our garden with apple juice and frozen them in a heat wave just to make a really delicious treat. So yeah, it's something I'm really passionate about. When children are involved in growing their own food, I don't think I need to tell you they're often much more adventurous with trying and eating things that they've grown themselves, and they will be willing to try things that they might have been a bit reluctant about before. So this links with Sustainable Development Goal 3, which is good health and well-being, and it's a really important one. And another thing that I'm really passionate about is that the food is distributed, it's shared fairly between the children and families and staff at the setting. So we harvest in the summer, we might harvest a crop like this most days with lots and lots of vegetables, and we'll put it out on the bench for when the children come, when the children are going home, and their parents can fill up, you know, a bag with fresh vegetables and fruit, and we share it with our neighbours and stuff as well. So yeah, it's food for all, which is great. And this is linked with Sustainable Development Goal 11, which is making communities inclusive, safe, resilient and sustainable. And I really want our setting to feel like such a positive part of our local community. So that's a part of this. So this basically, in a nutshell, describes the seed to plate process, which you'll be familiar with. But what I'm really interested in is taking it a little bit further and bringing that process full cycle so that we are being renewable in the way that we're growing food with children. So there's two things that we do to ensure this. One is seed saving. And you can see in these photographs here, I've got 3 boys. The left and the middle boy are age 3. The one on the right is age 2. And they are very carefully taking peas out of pods that we have dried and we'll be saving to plant the next year. And we'll produce enough seeds to be able to share them with our neighbours and friends and with the children's families if they have growing space at home as well. But from that one packet of organic heirloom seeds that I bought years ago to grow peas, year on year, I've been able to save the seed and grow more for free, which is really great because actually it's saving us money, it's saving resources in the garden, it's truly sustainable both economically and environmentally. And the final step I wanted to talk about is composting. So fresh scraps from cookery in the garden, all kind of veg waste and garden waste are composted. We've got 3 large compost bins. We've got a compost toilet. So all the children's wee and poo is also composted for use in the garden. We've got a wormery so that we can produce our own liquid plant feed. And the idea is that absolutely nothing goes to waste. It all gets returned back into the garden. I've become interested in this concept called the honourable harvest, which is written about by Robin Wall Kimmerer in her book Braiding Sweetgrass, which is absolutely beautiful. And she talks about this idea that when the earth gives something to you, you should always give something back to the earth so that you're in a reciprocal relationship with it. And that's something that I really believe. So when the earth is giving us nutrients by growing food for us to eat in the garden, we return nutrients to the earth by composting and feeding our garden back, and we're bringing it full cycle. Children get to see that full cycle of growth, decay and growth again, with harvesting resources from and then returning resources to the garden. I'm really passionate about that because what it means is the garden space is able to sustain us, it can sustain our use. And this links also with Sustainable Development Goal 12, which is sustainable consumption and production. Just on my last slide, I want to talk a little bit about taking it further. We're all on a journey with our sustainability. I have definitely not achieved sustainability in my setting. And it's a work in progress all the time, but I'm really interested in, what next? So we got really good at growing food in the garden, and we got to the point where the children were eating something that they had grown in the garden every day through the months of May all the way through to October. So that felt like a really big success. So I wanted to start being able to produce protein in the garden. So 2 years ago, we introduced a flock of ducks, which the children take care of, and they produce eggs. You can see in the photograph on the right that we have cooked food with the eggs, and we regularly do, and the children take them home to eat with their families sometimes as well. And that full kind of cycle, the ducks eat the scraps that we've produced when we're cooking. They forage for pests and insects in the garden, and then their droppings on straw are put into the compost heap, and they create a really rich food for the garden. So it all comes full cycle again. I'd like to, in the future, keep chickens. I'd really like to look into keeping bees so that we can produce our own honey. And I definitely want to explore introducing more plant-based proteins like nut bushes and nut trees into the garden in the future as well. And my most recent step is I've just taken on an allotment so that I'm able to grow more food with the children, and hopefully with a view of sharing more food with their families. So that is it. That brings me to the end of what I wanted to talk to you about, and I'm hoping to pass back to Gail and we can answer some of your questions.
Thank you so much. Wow, I don't know about you guys, but I loved it. Thank you so much for Diane and Millie. We did it slightly differently today because I know Diane is, bless her, she's in London and really in a busy environment, so we're just doing the Q&A afterwards. We have been inundated with some questions that people have sent to Gail and myself individually. I'll start by asking some questions and then Gail can ask some as well. But yeah, wow, do you know, obviously with Parental, we believe in the global goals and sustainability within the early years sector and work really hard on that. But I just think from an early years, getting it right from the children when they're so young, it's just so important actually seeing how it's been done in practice within the settings in the UK. I just love it. You know, it's really inspired me to take some of these ideas out to some of the schools we already have and, you know, that we've already built for these kids to see how we can implement some of these techniques. So thank you so, so much. I love it. Absolutely love it. So one of the questions we had is, what suggestions do you have to involve parents to promote this at home? Because obviously you're doing such an amazing work within the setting and obviously the kids are getting so involved and excited about this. But as we know, we need to create almost a spiral effect that we can get more and more people involved. What suggestions do you have or do you already have? I mean, Diane or Millie, either of you can answer this if you wanted to let us know what you guys tried in the past, what's worked, what hasn't worked, any suggestions you have.
Shall I take this one from a practitioner perspective? Okay, so it's really important that parents are involved and on board, because obviously children get so much more messaging if it's this experience that they're having in the setting and at home. I talk to parents a huge amount about what we do in terms of sustainability. It's what I write about in children's learning journals. So they're getting that messaging when they're receiving feedback about children's learning and development. And they kind of, you know, hopefully it sends that picture, that really clear message that this is an important part of learning. It's an important part of our curriculum and the way that we teach and work with young children. So that's really cool. Also, what I talked about at the end about sharing the food that we've grown with parents. But what I really like doing is inviting parents into the setting to be involved with food growing projects. We'll always send home a simple food growing project in the year for parents and children to do together. So usually, because not everybody has a garden or growing space that they can use, usually I will send home each child with a packet of cress seeds and some cotton wool. And it's so easy because you can just do it on an old plastic lid or something. You put the cotton wool onto the lid, you wet it, you plant cress seeds. And then I send home a really simple recipe for things that the parents and children can do together once they've grown the cress. And so they get to have that experience, even if they don't have a garden at home, of seed to plate in a really quick, sort of manageable way. And then often the parents will choose to do a bit of growing at home. So we will share seeds with them, we'll give them support and guidance in how to do it. But sustainability more broadly, I mean, I could probably talk about that for hours. Diane, is there anything that you wanted to add to that?
I was just saying in the chat that the bar I'm in now is full of a whole busload of people, so I'm struggling to actually hear. So I think Millie has answered that question. I think it's not just in case of involving parents, it's involving volunteers, it's involving any part of the community. So it's like looking broader than just the parents. What about the grandparents' friends, and auditing skills that they've got that you might be needing in your setting to use things with pallets. Well, you might have a grandfather who's an absolutely fantastic builder, or a plumber, and it's auditing the people who you've got, because that's what will make it a successful community, is if you involve everybody.
Love that. One of the questions we have is, how important is it, or do you think it is, to do critical reflection within an early years environment?
Diane, do you want to take that one?
I will start off with that. In the resource that I have included in the slides, there is a whole section at the back which talks about qualifications, and it also talks about reflection. The whole point of being a quality practitioner, which is SDG 4, is having the ability to reflect on and in the action and the work you are doing with children. And that is sometimes actually acknowledging that you might have an unconscious bias, or you might not have done something as well as you could. There is actually nothing wrong with saying, you know, I don't think I could do that again, or I've done that wrong. It's moving forward. And, you know, part of my learning when I was doing my PhD in early childhood education made me realize that I had never ever really considered the non-human world as being equal, because we are brought up in a world where it's about the human taxonomy, with the humans at the top, the human makes the decisions that we want to clear a forest to build more houses. We don't need those houses, but we're going to just build them anyway because it's about money. And one of the things that's made me really reflect on is the importance of the non-human world, and also the indigenous wisdoms of the elders. And that's not just people like the Aboriginals or the Maoris, but it's also, again, our local cultural, the people who, and that came about with the Legacy Cafe that you saw the clip of, with the death of my mother, when I realized that the skills she had, I didn't have. I didn't bake and cook and sew and knit and mend. My dad had an allotment, and so it's by me critically reflecting on the things I needed to do took me on this journey. And this is where I'm up to now, but I'm constantly reflecting. So the answer I would say is it's an integral part of being a quality practitioner. And Millie will probably say, yeah.
Well said. I would say exactly the same. We're all on this journey all of the time. That what I've realised, I think, the more that I work in early years, the more that I study, is that there's no finished product. There's no sort of perfection. You know, I've achieved Ofsted outstanding in my setting. That by no means means that I have done everything that I want to and need to do, and I never will. And I think there's something quite freeing about just embracing that chaos and just knowing that, you know, things are always changing. You know, you think you've got your head around one thing, and then a pandemic comes along and it changes everything. But also on the smaller scale, new cohorts of children and parents and their different needs and their different values and ideas, they're always making you reflect on yourself, your position, what your work means in kind of wider context. It's complicated, it's layered, and I really like that.
And I think in Reggio Emilio's sort of like concept, Carla Rinaldi talks about education like a tangled spaghetti. And I think if you always think about that, learning is not a full stop, it's not the end of a unit, an assessment, a learning outcome. It's about the fact that where can this learning take us next? And you can only do that if you are open, and you've got to be open.
Love it.
Thank you. Thanks, Diane and Millie. We have another question in, and it's about provocation. So probably for both of you, and Diane, you spoke about this in detail, but Millie, obviously you've got the practical experience. But do you have any tips to allow the children to start leading the conversation, the provocation? It's so easy, isn't it, for the, and I know we talk about child-led learning quite a bit, but how easy, do you have any top tips to help practitioners with that initial kind of just nudging them to start the provocation?
I would say that having a good collection of books about sustainability is a great starting point if you feel like it's not coming from the children, because that just sparks and generates conversation. But I think what's really key is that it must not stop there, because they can't really know it unless they are having hands-on, real-life, meaningful experiences in their local community. So I think a book is a great starting point. It can kind of get an idea going if it isn't already going, and get discussion and thinking going. But then it really needs to carry on with visits and trips into the community, regularly doing that, making links, just being immersed in it. That's what I would say.
And I would on that as well, in the sense of that provocations could also come from a child asking a question. And it could be something as simple as that they have seen a homeless man in the corner of their shop in the doorway and asking the question, why is he sleeping there? Or a dead hedgehog on the road. And instead of like thinking these are not issues for children to discuss, it's opening them up to say, to ask sort of in an empathetic way, why is this something that you're interested in finding out about? Because we have to not just assume that they have got certain knowledge already. We need to know what they already know. So what do you think? Why do you think that the hedgehog has died? Where do you think he was going? So it's sort of like could come from a book, or it could come from a question, or it could come from something that they have seen on their way to school. So it's being open to recognizing it's not about planning.
Yeah.
Thank you, Diane. Another question that's come in directly. There's been so much information given today by both of you, both in theory and in practice. If you could give your top 3 takeaways from today that people could just start making a difference, what would you say?
Oh, that's a great question. Shall I go first? My top 3 takeaways would be: get out into your community and get connected to it. That's really important, and that supports learning and development across the board. We don't exist in these little isolated early year settings. You really, really need to be prioritizing being a part of your wider community, and that might mean inviting the community into your setting. So that would be one. The other one would be have hands-on real life experiences with children in nature, and hopefully that part of that offer will be in the garden that's attached to your setting. And I really believe I deliver training on developing early years gardens. And so often people come to them and they say, well, I've just got a tiny concrete yard and there's nothing I can do with it. But actually there's so much you can do. You can grow fruit trees in an espalier design against the walls, so they don't take up any space, but they'll offer you blossom to attract bees and birds. They'll offer you beautiful colour and leaves, and you'll get to see the full cycle of seed to fruiting and eating. It's really, it's possible in any space, I would say. Oh, and then number three, I think would just be, to have a look at Diane's resource, because I've really, really enjoyed, she sent me a hard copy in the post, and I've really enjoyed looking at all the different ideas and provocations and just thinking about how it is so connected to everything that we want to achieve when we're working with development matters or birth to 5 matters. It's just a part of it. It's a part of education and just child development. It's so interesting. Here it is. She's holding it up. It's a great resource. Go and find it and use it.
We will share a copy of it as well.
There's the electronic link is in the slides, and my first one would be that to have a look at the Sustainable Development Goals, and what I would love would be for settings, regardless of who they are, childminders, nurseries, preschools, is to display them on the wall in their settings so the children can see them at visible height, to understand what they all are about, to look at my resource and to see the depth of the different types of provocations. And my final one would be to do the audit of the people in your community who would like to be involved. Like the example I had of Liverpool in the Children's Centre, we brought in elderly people who were in a residential homes that had never spoken to each other, and they lived in the rooms next door to each other. They were just sitting in their room on their own. So audit the people in your community and get them involved, because they are full of a wealth of materials and knowledge and skills that we don't have nowadays, and it's really important. So they're my 3.
I love it.
Display, read, audit.
Thank you so much. I just wonder, my son is 16 now, and I was thinking, why did I not have practitioners like you guys when my son was little?
Just thinking the same. It's just
an absolute breath of fresh air. So thank you so much for sharing your amazing ideas with us.
Thank you.
Guys, I think we're running out of time, and we've all got busy schedules and lovely little kids to go and look after. So I just wanted to say thank you so much again from Millie and to Diane for your lovely time. And Diane, thanks so much for overcoming.
Thank you.
I know you were really worried about the environment, but thank you so much. It's brilliant. Millie, thank you so much again. And guys, I know we're low and non-biz this week, but obviously it's Easter week as well. But I just wanted to say thank you for everybody who's attended, and have a lovely rest of the week, guys, and enjoy the sunshine. Hopefully it lasts a bit longer. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a nice day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye. Bye.